That same day, two of the disciples were walking to the village of Emmaus, about 7 miles out of Jerusalem. And they were deep in conversation, going over all the things that had happened. In the middle of their talk and questions, Jesus came up and walked along with them, but they were not able to recognize who he was. He asked, "What's this you're discussing so intently as you walk along?" They just stood there long-faced, like they had just lost their best friend. And then one of them, his name was Cleopas, said, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what happened during the last few days?" And Jesus said, "What's happened?" And they said, "The things that happened to Jesus, the Nazarene. He was a man of God, a prophet, dynamic in work and word, blessed by both God and all the people. But then our own high priests and leaders betrayed him. He was sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had our hopes up that he was the one about to deliver Israel. And now it's been 3 days since this has happened. Some of our women have completely confused us. Early this morning, they were at the tomb and couldn't find his body. And they came back with the story that they'd seen a vision of angels and who said he was still alive. And some of our friends went off to the tomb to check and found it empty, just as the women said, but they didn't see Jesus." And then Jesus said to them, "You're so foolish and so slow-hearted. Why is it so hard for you to believe all that the prophets said? Don't you see that these things had to happen, that the Messiah had to suffer and then enter into the glory? And then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all of the scriptures." They came to the edge of the village where they were headed, and Jesus acted as if he were going to go on, but they pressed him. "Stay, have supper with us. It's nearly evening, the day's almost done." And so he went in with them, and here's what happened. He sat down at the table with them, and taking the bread, he blessed and broke and gave it to them. And at that moment, open-eyed, wide-eyed, they recognized him. And then he disappeared. And back and forth they talked. Didn't our hearts burn within us as he conversed with us on the road and as he opened up the scriptures for us? And that's the end of the reading. All right, now, before you listen to my message, I'm going to invite you all to take a moment and to stand and stretch. You've been sitting there for a while. So everybody take, if you want, or just go like this. Okay, I can see a bunch of you. Let's go like this, stand, stretch, move around. Okay, wake up if you're falling asleep. Okay, very good. Just come back if you're going to the kitchen or something. All right. I want to point out just a few things briefly in this story, and then tell you a story, and then we'll share communion together. First, the context here, obviously, these guys were completely brokenhearted and disillusioned, and life had just taken a huge, unexpected turn for what felt like not just the worst, but complete tragedy and loss. They didn't know what to do. I think a lot of us can kind of relate to that moment in our own ways, especially now. So that's the context. And then this stranger appears to them. And basically, this story is a story of Christ being with them and interacting with them directly and intimately, and yet they didn't know it. And so in that sense, it kind of symbolizes for us the times that God's with us, maybe talking to us, maybe more intimately, directly present than we have any idea or have ever experienced, but we're completely clueless. And we don't know. We don't know it's God. And another thing, it may not be that meaningful to you, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to forever be envious of these guys because they were treated to the most kick-butt Bible study in all of human history. The Messiah himself went through the entire Bible and said, look, here it is. Pointed out all the references to the Messiah and the prophecies and showed how he himself fulfilled them. They still didn't know it was him, but he was getting their attention now. And being the Bible nerd that I am, I would give anything to have been on that road listening to the Messiah explain it all through the scriptures. But here's my main point. This is a story of one of those moments when somehow, just for a second, maybe, it all becomes clear and your eyes are opened and the risen Christ, the Spirit, God, this mystery, all of a sudden gets so real. You can see it. You get it. You feel it. I alluded to these mountaintop experiences on the first Sunday of Lent during Transfiguration Sunday. And I really think that we need, most of us, to have an experience now and then where the veil parts, and even if it's just a fleeting moment, all the questions are answered or just disappear or evaporate. And there's just something so real about the whole thing that you know, even though you can't explain it, right? If you've had a moment like that, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you're probably wondering why not. I'll say something about that in a minute. But these experiences, they can change everything. I mean, you can't build your life on them. You can't really build, I mean, you shouldn't even try to build your faith on them. And yet, you keep coming back to them. I'll say more in just a sec. I think we need to tell each other some of these stories from our own lives. What happened that day gets told again and again and again. And if you haven't had an experience like this, I was thinking, okay, well, why not? And here's all I'll say before I share with you one of these experiences of my own, and then my message will be done. Attitude matters. One of the things that's really important in this text is that when it came time for the end, after they'd had the Bible study, and something was happening inside there, it says their hearts burned within them. They knew there was something about this person and something was beginning to happen, and it was time to go. And Jesus was going to keep going, but he waited for the invitation. And they said, don't go. Stay with us. Spend more time with us. Come on in. And they were offering hospitality, of course, but they also didn't want this time with him to end. And all I can say is that the attitude that we bring with us as we go about life wondering if God is real, wondering if this faith stuff is real, or wanting it to be more real, the attitude matters. If you're looking for God to appear, chances are much greater that God will. Not in a way that defies the laws of nature necessarily, but on the other hand, if you're the kind of person that's like, okay, I don't believe this stuff. I'm not going to believe this stuff unless I see a peer-reviewed study that verifies empirically that there's the existence of God or something. If you're that person, no, it's not going to happen. I can almost guarantee. So if we're open, as I heard it once said, the one for whom we are looking is looking for us. I had a friend, his name's Frank Butler. He was the CEO of Eastman Gel, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of Kodak. And Frank said that whenever he would talk to people and they said, well, nothing's ever happened to me, or I don't believe in God, or I don't have any proof, he'd say, I dare you to do what I'll call the 30-day challenge. And he said, look, for 1 month, if every day you'll take 5 minutes, and with as much open-mindedness and open-heartedness and humility as possible, just say to God in your own ways, if you are there, I would like to know you. And be open and look expectantly to see if something might happen that would speak to your life. He said, I guarantee you, if you do that with as much integrity and openness as you can for a month, I guarantee you something will happen. Something will speak. And if not, well, then you took a good shot at it, right? But you can't play games. You got to really mean it. Well, I wanted to close by sharing with you one of my stories. I hadn't thought about this in a while, but it's one of those moments where, for me, my eyes, like those disciples, were open, and all of a sudden I saw, or I heard, or I sensed God's presence in a way that was so real. It was a long time ago. My dad, real quickly, had left my family when I was 12. He fell in love with another man. It turned out my dad was gay, and back in those days it was complicated and took a lot of courage on his part to be who he actually was. It was a mess and painful for everybody, but it was a good thing for him and ultimately for all of us. His partner and I are still good friends. He's 88 now. They lived in New York City. My dad was a fashion designer in New York City. And I was talking to my dad's partner just recently, and he reminded me that he and my dad were friends with Donald Trump and Ivana, Donald's first wife. And ask me later about that. That's not my point this morning. But they knew a lot of fancy people and celebrities in New York City in that whole fashion scene. My dad died of AIDS in the first wave. And his partner asked if I would lead the funeral service. They were very devout Catholics and real active in a church in Connecticut where they had a house on the weekends in Newtown, Connecticut. But they had too many friends that lived in New York. And so when my dad died, they figured it made sense to have the funeral at a Catholic church in New York City. There was a big cathedral right around from where they lived, or not far, and they arranged to have it there. They knew a lot of celebrities, and so my dad's obituary got in the New York Times. The Archbishop, who was very, very conservative, had an office at this cathedral and happened to read the obituary and put the thing together that my dad was gay and that the funeral was scheduled to happen at his cathedral. So when we all showed up that day and went into the office just before the service, the Archbishop came in and said, this funeral's not happening here. I said, you got to be kidding me. And he said, no. And I had my clergy robe on a coat hanger with me. And he said, you a priest? I said, well, no, I'm a Protestant minister. He said, are you ordained? I said, yeah. He said, okay, you can say a few words. Nobody else speaks. Get it over with. He did relent and allow us to have one song, which I'm laughing because the one song, a Broadway actress came and sang, and it was the song, What I Did for Love, from a chorus line, can't regret what I did for love. It was classic. Anyway, we made it through somehow. We were driving back to Wisconsin. I had to get back. And my son, Sam, was about 7 years old. My wife and my daughter were asleep in the back seat, and it got real late at night. And my son, Sam, kind of decided that he was going to put his big boy pants on. And he gave himself the job of staying awake so that I wouldn't fall asleep because we needed to drive through the night. And it was a beautiful night, and we're driving on Route 80 through the mountains of Pennsylvania. And we're just quiet, and the sky was just full of stars, so thick it felt like you could just reach out and grab a handful. And I didn't realize that Sam was even awake still. About 1 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, he says, "Dad, you did a really good job today." And it was his way as a little kid of just saying, "Hey, Dad, I'm proud of you." And I can't prove this to anybody. But there, through the words of my little son, dealing with my complicated relationship with my dad and what had just happened that day, it was kind of, I just felt, sensed, heard God saying, "Well done. I'm proud of you." And no one can ever tell me that God didn't fill that car with a presence that I'll never forget. Never forget. Can't prove that stuff. But I want to hear about some of your moments when the divine mystery was just so real. And what I love about the Emmaus story is that as soon as in the breaking of the bread, which by the way was probably the last thing they did with Jesus before he died, in the breaking of the bread, all of a sudden it says their eyes were open, and as soon as they said, "It's Jesus," boom, he's gone. And these things don't last. Except in here, where our hearts burn. So pay attention and don't demand proof.